Hello and welcome. I'm Nadira Tudor and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. Russia claims Ukraine has struck them with US long-range missiles 1,000 days since the start of the invasion, as Vladimir Putin approves an updated nuclear doctrine. It comes as President Zelenskyy pushes the European Parliament to continue their support and put more pressure on Moscow. In the United States, Donald Trump announces plans to use the country's military to carry out the largest mass deportation of illegal migrants in US history. And 45 pro-democracy activists are jailed in Hong Kong in the region's biggest national security trial as they're accused of attempting to overthrow the government. To our top story now. Ukraine has fired the US-approved long-range missiles into Russia, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. RIA Novosti says 6 missiles hit the Bryansk region overnight, with 5 shells shot down. It comes on the 1,000th day since Russia invaded Ukraine. For more on this, I'm joined from Moscow by our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, we're hearing reports from Moscow that Ukraine have already used the long-range missiles to hit Russia in the Bryansk region. How worrying is this report?
Well, indeed, it is the first time that the US-supplied ATACMS missiles have been used against the Russian sovereign territory, especially since the announcement of this permission has been made. We understand that 6 ATACMS missiles have been fired by the Ukrainian side, 5 have been intercepted, and the debris of the 6th one have fallen on the area of the military object in Russia's Bryansk region. No damage or casualties have been reported, but it is indeed a worrying signal. We have heard the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov confirming that this strike actually means that the US wants escalation, because from Russia's perspective, giving Ukraine the permission to strike Russia with the long-range US-supplied missiles is only meaning that it is the US that is striking Russia, because from Russian perspective, it is obvious that it is simply impossible for the Ukrainian officers to operate these type of weapons on their own.
Now, it has been quite a reaction, hasn't it, Dasha? Vladimir Putin to Joe Biden's decision to allow Ukraine to use their long-range missiles on Russian soil, and he took his time to announce the changes to the nuclear doctrine. Tell us more.
Well, indeed, the Russian president has signed on a decree which provides for the revision of Russia's nuclear doctrine, and it has a much more detailed number of cases and triggers, so to say, when Russia could use its nuclear deterrence. So we understand from the updated text that against the version of 2020, Russia could actually use its nuclear weapons in case of a joint attack by a non-nuclear state that is supported by a nuclear country, and this is a change from the previous edition. We also understand that Moscow will be possibly using its nuclear deterrence in an attack of the large-scale attack against Russia with the use of drones or missiles, and that it will also be seen as the possible trigger. We also understand from the new edition that Russia will engage in nuclear deterrence against those countries that offer their territory, maritime zones, airspace and resources for aggression against Russia. However, it is not really clear whether this will definitely mean that Russia will inevitably use its nuclear weapons in case such attack actually takes place. It also mentions the uncertainty of scale, of time and place of possible use of nuclear deterrent. But what Russia is trying to say with the update of this doctrine is that it is not new. Russia has been talking about it ever since the talk of the permission to Ukraine to use long-range weapons has started. And Russia has sent very clear that it is a signal, and the hope is that the Western countries will carefully study all the provisions of the upgraded nuclear doctrine and will think twice before actually striking Russia with those long-range weapons, because Moscow says any attack against the Russian territory will not be left unanswered.
Given that the words and the rhetoric is extremely strong, and obviously the actions of changing that doctrine as well, this change that would make Russia's leadership consider a nuclear strike, that will be sending shockwaves throughout the international community. What measures have been put in place to ensure a catastrophe, should there ever be that, can be avoided?
Well, from the Russian perspective, the only way to avoid a catastrophe is to be responsible, and Moscow says it is still adhering to the principle of avoiding a nuclear escalation and a nuclear war. So Russia says it has always viewed the use of its nuclear weapons as the means of deterrence, as the last resort measure. So the hope here in the Russian capital is that it will not come to the point when Russia will still have to use this type of weapons. Having said that, Moscow is still sending a very strong message to the Western countries. Also, we've heard the Russian foreign minister actually welcoming the decision by Germany not to send its towers to Ukraine, not to allow Ukraine to strike Russia with their long-range weapons. So Russia is trying to make it clear to the Western countries that it has something to respond with in case the Western countries try to escalate. But an important point here to keep in mind that this is the permission that is being granted by the outgoing administration, and the hope, at least among the political analysts and military specialists here in the Russian capital, is that actually the situation will not deteriorate to the point when Donald Trump comes to power and there will be nothing left to repair.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you for the update. Changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine have come as a direct result from the United States' decision to grant Ukraine permission to use US long-arm missiles. Yesterday, the Kremlin gave a warning that Moscow would respond and accused the West of playing with fire by probing the limits of what a nuclear power might or might not tolerate. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Boris Bondarev, former Russian counselor on arms control at the Russian diplomatic mission in Geneva, who resigned from his position in May 2022 following Russia's invasion of Ukraine a few months before. Welcome to the programme, Boris. Now, in response to Ukraine providing the go-ahead to use long-range missiles and their subsequent use in Russia's Bryansk region, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said, "We will be taking this as a qualitatively new phase of the Western war against Russia, and we will react accordingly." What do you suspect this reaction will involve?
Well, we should look at previous precedents, which we have many, starting from the very beginning of the invasion, when on February 24th, President Putin said that in case of any other country would try to interfere, Russia would respond with all means, whatever it sees fit. Of course, hinting at nuclear weapons. And he keeps threatening with his nuclear weapons ever since. And the Western countries interfered. They started supplying Ukraine with lethal weapons. And then it was HIMARS systems, then it was long-range missiles. It was a lot of other modern weapons. And each time when the Western countries, NATO and United States, have crossed this another red line, Russia threatened them with nuclear weapons. It's been on the table since the day one, and they still pursuing this agenda. So there is nothing new in this yesterday's amendments into the Russian nuclear doctrine. It's all good rhetoric aimed at deterring the Western countries from multiplying, from intensifying their military support to Ukraine.
Boris, I suppose from the international community's perspective, it's about what the Russian red line is, and are they reasonable red lines? In your opinion, are they reasonable red lines?
Well, to discuss about Putin's red lines, it is important to understand what this entire war is about. This entire war is about preserving Putin's regime of his personal power over Russia. And he wants to exclude any possibility to undermine his power. And the main threat to his power in Russia, and the only threat, as he considers it, is the threat that coming from the West. He believes the Western countries are bent to undermining, diminishing, and overthrowing him. Whatever paranoid it may seem, but Putin and his closer circle, they are all about this. So they want to stop it. They want to put the Western world, United States, first of all, to their place. So they know that this is sphere of influence of Putin, like Russia, Ukraine, the former Warsaw Pact, perhaps, that no other country has the right to interfere. That's why he started this war. It's war to reestablish his unique position. So what are his reasonable red lines? His only red line is to stay in the Kremlin, to stay at power, and he will do whatever he sees fit to achieve it. Also, he doesn't want to die. He's not a fanatic. He's not a religious, leader. He's not a prophet. He's just a corrupted dictator who wants to live the rest of his life in his villas, in his palaces, with his friends, with his grandsons and all. So all he has to do now, it is to threaten the Western countries from supporting Ukraine, hoping that this support will stop when Donald Trump comes into office, and then Ukraine will surrender eventually. Maybe in 1 month, in 2 months, in 3 months, Putin is quite confident that he may prevail in this war because the West seems to allow him to prevail in this war, despite the Western interests, of course. But if Putin can be forced to use nuclear weapons, theoretically, yes, but it would be very much of a suicide to him, and he understands it.
Boris, I mean, you've mentioned some really strong phrases there, which, from the outside looking in, and obviously from the inside, because you were on the inside, are extremely worrying. So, you're saying that he's paranoid, it's a corrupt dictator, and this is what the war about. But there's a nuclear threat, isn't there? How likely is it that that button will be pressed?
Well, this is a question of Putin's psyche, I would say. It's not about the doctrine, because if it comes to the point that Putin and his generals gather somewhere and think about using nuclear weapons for real, they will never recall that there is some kind of doctrine. They will never look into it and look for whether the doctrine allows them to strike nuclear bomb on Ukraine or another country or not. Of course not. They will be thinking only if the nuclear strike will be beneficial to them at this very point, at this very moment. So it's only up to them. And of course, there is no foolproof. The Russian system is so personalist. It is so designed to cater to the wishes of one man. So there is no foolproof, there is no checks and balances. And unfortunately, if Putin decides to use nuclear weapons, there will be 99% that there will be no resistance, no sabotage, no nothing, they will do it. So the question is how to make him not to decide so. And that is why I believe that he must be confronted with the might and resilience and resolve from both Ukraine and its Western partners. They must tell Putin unequivocally that don't even dare thinking about nuclear weapons, because retaliation will be, so to speak. Because today, Putin may have a lot of reasons to suspect that if he uses nuclear weapons, there will be no retaliation, that the Western countries will be so afraid, and the Western leaders will be so afraid of this, that they will just retreat and say, okay, we don't know anything. We don't want to be part of this. We don't want to get involved. Okay, get Ukraine, get whatever you want. Just don't do it, with us. And he has many reasons, because the Western leaders are behaving right now in this fashion.
Boris Bondarev, former Russian Counselor on Arms Control. It's been really great to have you on the programme. Thank you for your opinions. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Earlier today, Vladimir Zelenskyy pressured the European Parliament to push Moscow harder towards a just peace. Speaking on the 1,000th day since the Russian invasion, the Ukraine president thanked the leaders in Brussels for their support and asked for their continued help. Here's what he had to say.
Putin remains smaller than the united strength of Europe. I urge you not to forget this, and do not forget how much Europe is capable of achieving. And if we could stop Europe's way of life from falling, then we can surely push Russia towards a just peace.
For more on this, I'm joined from Brussels by our correspondent, William Denselow. William, we've just seen a short clip of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy remotely addressing the MEPs. What else did he say?
Well, there was a huge message of thanks from Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelenskyy, saying that for 1,000 days the European Union had stood side by side with Kiev. But he urged the EU to not stop there, to continue to do what they can to provide support for Kiev in its war with Russia. That was a very strong sentiment. Vladimir Zelenskyy also made a veiled reference to the US elections, urging European allies not to be distracted by elections. Of course, that a veiled reference to Donald Trump and concerns that are certainly shared in Brussels about what this impact of the Trump presidency could have for continued support for Ukraine going forward. So President Zelenskyy very much urging European allies to stay the course and do what they can to continue providing support for Ukraine. This comes in a week where Vladimir Zelenskyy has also made strong references to the use of long-range weaponry to be used to strike targets deep into Russian territory. Volodymyr Zelenskyy saying that words are not enough and that missiles speak for themselves. So then very much a message for European allies to follow the lead of the Biden administration in Washington and to give their approval for these weapons to be used for Ukraine as they see fit.
Now, as we've mentioned, it's been 1,000 days since the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, and the European Parliament is marking the date in the form of a special summit. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what they're promising?
Absolutely. Well, there was a huge show of support for Ukraine's president, a long-standing ovation for Ukraine's president as he addressed the parliament here in Brussels, although it must be said that Volodymyr Zelenskyy was addressing it remotely. However, that didn't stop many parliamentarians, many MEPs from getting to their feet and applauding Ukraine's president. Many, including the president of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, commending his bravery, his courage, as well as a leader, but also the bravery of the Ukrainian people over this last 1,000 days, saying that they have been an inspiration around the world. There was a strong show of support from many MEPs and many of the European parties. We heard from Manfred Weber, the head of the EPP, the largest political group here in Brussels in the European Parliament. Now, Manfred Weber said that what we needed going forward was peace through strength, not concessions. He said it was up to the EU to follow Washington's lead and approve these long-range missiles to be used. That was a sentiment shared by many, but important to note that this isn't a universal support. Some on the far right of the political spectrum here in Brussels even boycotted the event, having their own event outside of Brussels. So not even all MEPs were at this event. And we also, from some on the right that did attend here in Brussels, we heard from Kinga Gál, who represents Patriots for Europe. Now, she condemned Russia's act of aggression, as she put it, but she said that saving lives must be a priority and the focus should be on achieving a ceasefire as quickly as possible.
Thank you, William Denselow in Brussels. US President-elect Donald Trump has confirmed he plans to declare a national emergency and use the military to carry out mass deportations. As many as 11 million people are thought to be living in the US illegally, but there are concerns forcing out such a large proportion of America's workforce could lead to major economic problems, as Nick Harper reports from Washington.
Day one in office will be D-Day for mass deportations. Donald Trump confirming US policy, as he did through so much of his first term, via social media. Replying to a conservative commentator on Truth Social, Trump simply wrote it was true military assets would be used for a mass deportation program. Millions are preparing for the threat of deportation, while lawmakers in states like Arizona are stepping up plans to secure the US-Mexico border.
Protecting our border is not a Republican or Democratic issue. It is an Arizona and an American issue. And that's why I will work with anyone to secure our border. Just as I worked with this current administration to launch Task Force SAFE, I will work with the next one to deliver border security.
It's still unclear how Trump will carry out the deportations or the legality of such a move. Legal challenges are expected. It's projected the plan will cost billions of dollars to implement, while stripping millions of workers from the workforce will cause GDP to shrink by more than $1 trillion.
I'll make an announcement.
The deportation plan is playing out amid a courtroom battle that's captured headlines and Trump's attention. 22-year-old Laken Riley was killed in the state of Georgia earlier this year. On Monday, a Venezuelan undocumented migrant went on trial for her murder. Trump has used the case to argue the current government's border policy has failed. Figures suggest border officials have stopped more than 10 million migrants entering the US during the almost 4 years of Joe Biden's administration. Immigration was a clear vote winner for Donald Trump, helping to propel him back to the White House. Now he's expected to announce a slew of executive actions within hours of walking back into office on January the 20th. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Let's take a look at some of the other top stories making news around the world. More than 200 children have been killed in Lebanon in the last 2 months, according to the UN children's agency UNICEF. Those deaths correlate with Israel's escalation attacks on Hezbollah. During a press briefing in Geneva, a UNICEF spokesperson said, "For the children of Lebanon, it has become a silent normalization of horror." Donald Trump has selected former Fox business presenter Sean Duffy as his transport secretary. Duffy, a former Wisconsin congressman, has been a loyal supporter of the president-elect and, if successful, will be put in charge of a $110 billion annual budget across aviation, rail and automotive policies. Gisèle Pelicot, the woman at the centre of France's mass rape trial, has been giving her final statement in the city of Avignon today. Her ex-husband, Dominique Pelicot, who is on trial alongside 50 others, has admitted putting sleeping pills in his wife's food before abusing her, before recruiting groups of men to sexually assault her. A verdict is expected on the 20th of December. Marius Borg Høiby, the son of Norway's crown princess, has been arrested on suspicion of rape. The 27-year-old, who has no royal titles or duties, was arrested in Oslo late last night. He denies the allegations. And huge crowds have taken to the streets in Wellington, New Zealand, to support Maori rights. They're protesting a colony law that could alter the country's treaty between Maori people and the British monarchy. Today, a Hong Kong court jailed 45 pro-democracy activists for up to 10 years following a landmark national security trial that's damaged the city's once feisty democracy movement and drawn criticism from the US and other countries, as Laura Westbrook reports.
Hundreds of people gathered at court today, many having camped overnight to be there to witness the culmination of the city's largest national security trial. In court, the national security judge took around 10 minutes to read out the sentences, going by number rather than by name. Now, some of the defendants had waved to their loved ones in the gallery, and it was emotional when the sentences were read out. We heard some gasps in the courtroom when they finally learned of their fate. The sentences ranged from more than 4 years to 10 years, the harshest sentence going to former law professor Benny Tai. He pled guilty to the charge of conspiracy to commit subversion, and he had faced up to life in prison. He got around a third off for pleading guilty, and he was named as the unofficial organizer of a primary vote that took place in July of 2020 to pick candidates for elections later that year. There were warnings from the government that the vote contravened the Beijing-imposed national security law, but it was held anyway, and prosecutors accused the activists of plotting to undermine the government and force then leader Carrie Lam to resign by aiming to win a majority in the Legislative Council and using it to block budgets. Now, organisers had argued that their actions were allowed under the Basic Law, which is Hong Kong's mini constitution, but the 3 national security judges said this plan would have caused a constitutional crisis. And this has been a lengthy legal process. Many of the defendants have been in jail for more than 3 years. Joshua Wong, who was the face of the Umbrella movement in 2014, was sentenced to 4 years and 6 months. Loved ones and family members were in court today, including the wife of former lawmaker known as Long Hair Leung, who was jailed for 6 years and 9 months. Now, Chan Po-ying said she felt calm when she heard of the sentence of her husband because she was under no illusion that he would be released soon. Now, we have heard from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Li Jiang, who told reporters that no one can engage in illegal activities in the name of democracy. Now, Beijing imposed the national security law in 2020 in the wake of the 2019 anti-government protests, and the government has said that it's restored order and stability in the city. But critics say it's transformed Hong Kong and it has been used to crush dissent and the opposition. Now, I spoke to Maya Wang from Human Rights Watch, and she told me that for those who work in this space or who participated in the pro-democracy movement, that they were saddened by the sentencing. She said that people in Hong Kong have grown up watching debates in Legco or even running for election, and now trying to win a majority in an election can land you in prison. She said the harsh sentences show how much Hong Kong's civil liberties have been erased. Laura Westbrook for Al Arabiya News, Hong Kong.
Let's take a look at some of the top business news. US aerospace manufacturer Boeing will cut more than 2,500 jobs in the states of Washington, Oregon, South Carolina and Missouri as part of its cost-saving mission to lay off 10% of its workforce. Over 2,000 of those affected are tasked with building commercial airliners. Food and drink giant Nestlé has announced efforts to increase its advertising and marketing budget after a $2.8 billion cost-cutting drive. It's hoped the plan will increase the company's growth, an idea put forward by new CEO Laurent Freaks, who took over in September. The weight loss drug Wegovy has been launched in China this week after approval was given by health authorities earlier this year. It's thought that the maker's Novo Nordisk will charge 1,400 yuan for 4 injections. More than 180 million live with obesity in China. The country is also the world's second largest pharmaceutical market. To sport now, and Live Golf star Sergio Garcia has confirmed he will rejoin the DP World Tour for the 2025 season for a chance to play at next year's Ryder Cup. He's the event's record point scorer and is looking to match Lee Westwood and Sir Nick Faldo's European record of 11 appearances at the biennial competition. It's thought the Spanish golfer has now settled his debts after being fined for leaving the DP World Tour to join Live Golf. And the Honduras football team will play their next home game behind closed doors after Mexico's coach Javier Aguirre was hit by a beer can at the country's clash during the Nations League quarter-final. The Confederation of North Central American Caribbean Association Football says that Honduras failed to implement adequate stadium security measures. Let's remind you of our top stories. Russia claims Ukraine has struck them with US long-range missiles 1,000 days since the start of the invasion, as Vladimir Putin approves an updated nuclear doctrine. It comes as President Zelenskyy pushes the European Parliament to continue their support and put more pressure on Moscow. In the United States, Donald Trump announces plans to use the country's military to carry out the largest mass deportations of illegal migrants in US history. And 45 pro-democracy activists are jailed in Hong Kong in the region's biggest national security trial as they're accused of attempting to overthrow the government. That's all from us on W News. Thanks for joining us. Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up with GMT. Good night.